Hi everyone, and thank you to the organisers for the opportunity to present. I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm presenting, the Bedegal people of the Eora Nation, and elders past, present and emerging. Firstly, we have no pharmaceutical funding to disclose. All of the funding for this project was received from the federal and state and territory health departments. So the background to this analysis is the emergence of combination HIV prevention, which raises the possibility that sexual transmission of HIV can be eliminated in Australia, specifically between gay and bisexual men. By combination prevention, we mean the use of any highly effective prevention strategy, and in this particular analysis, we define that as condoms, pre-exposure prophylaxis use, PrEP, or HIV treatment as prevention. Now, in this analysis, we assess trends in these strategies and the proportion of gay and bisexual men who are protected by any of them. And this is what we're referring to as net prevention coverage, as in we don't really mind what you use as long as you use something that's effective. We also present an analysis of trends in the characteristics of gay and bisexual men who may remain at risk of HIV, so they don't use any of these effective strategies themselves, to see if this group has become more or less at risk of HIV over time, particularly since the introduction of PrEP. Now, the data I'm drawing from come from the Gay Community Periodic Surveys, National Behavioural Surveillance of Gay and Bisexual Men, conducted in 7 states and territories, a project I lead. And the time period is between 2014, before the introduction of PrEP, up until the end of last year, so before COVID-19. Responses from over 32,000 participants who had casual male partners in the 6 months prior to the survey are included. The median age of the sample was 34 years. Most of the sample identified as gay and a minority identified as bisexual. Most were Australian born. 3% were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. And over 8 out of 10 in the sample said they were HIV negative as a result of testing. 1 in 10 said they were HIV positive, and a slightly smaller group said they were untested or unknown status. Okay, so let's move on to the main results. Many of you will be familiar with this slide, sometimes referred to as the rainbow slide for its rather cheery colouring in. This shows you sexual practices with casual male partners in the 6 months prior to survey. It's a mutually exclusive classification system, going from the safest activities up to those that present a risk of transmission. And I'll just try and summarise what's going on here. At the bottom in dark blue are participants who say they haven't had anal intercourse with casual partners, and therefore that's probably the safest activity. But you can see there in a minority, there was about 18% of the samples said they had sex with casual partners but didn't have anal sex back in 2014. And it's a slightly smaller group at the end of 2019, just less than 15%. The next group in green are men who say they practice consistent condom use for anal sex with their casual partners. You can see back in 2014, this was the predominant strategy, the most common one, reported by nearly 45% of men with casual partners. But this is diminished quite considerably over time and was only reported by 23% of the sample last year. All the other groups from the light blue upwards report condomless sex with casual partners. The first group in light blue are positive men who are undetectable, which we now know poses no risk of onward transmission to sexual partners. This group has increased slightly in size. You can see it was 5%, nearly 5% back in 2014, and is now nearly 6% of gay and bisexual men with casual partners. The next group in yellow, it shows you the biggest change. These are negative men on PrEP who also report condomless sex. You can see there's almost none of them back in 2014, and then a very rapid increase from 2016 onwards, to the extent that in 2019, 31% of this particular sample were negative men on PrEP who reported condomless sex. And so you can see this is now between 2018 and 2019, it took over from condoms as the most commonly used prevention strategy in this group. Above them, there's a very small group, positive men not on treatment or with a detectable viral load. It was only 1.6% back in 2014, and it's now only 0.6% in 2019. So a very, very small group, very few positive men not on treatment, and very few positive men who aren't undetectable in this sample. Now above them in red are negative and untested men who aren't using PrEP but do report condomless sex. So we classify these men as at highest risk of HIV infection. You can see at the beginning of this analysis period, nearly 30% of the sample were these men. It remained relatively stable until 2016 as PrEP use started to take off. And you can see by 2019, just less than a quarter of the sample were negative and untested men not on PrEP who reported condomless sex. So this group, this at-risk group, has got slightly smaller. Okay, so let's consider a net prevention coverage concept. So the use of any safe strategies during casual sex. So you can see back in 2014, just over 2/3 of men with casual partners were classified as practicing safe sex. Avoiding anal intercourse, consistent condom use, having an undetectable viral load, or being on PrEP themselves. And this has increased quite a lot in the last few years and is now 3/4 of the sample is classified as being directly protected by a safe strategy. And you can see the trend result there is significant. And we think this increase in prevention coverage, particularly in the last few years, has set the conditions for reduced HIV infections among gay and bisexual men in Australia. Another way of looking at this is to just consider the men who have condomless sex with casual partners, and that's what I'm showing you here. So all of this is just restricted to participants who had condomless sex with casual partners in the last 6 months. And you can see here a really dramatic increase in the use of biomedical HIV prevention. So at the bottom, you've got positive men on treatment with an undetectable viral load in blue, PrEP users in yellow, positive men who are not undetectable in orange. It's a very, very small group, a little sliver, and then negative and untested men who aren't using PrEP in red. And if we just focus on the coverage of PrEP and treatment as prevention, very few men who were practicing condomless sex back in 2014 were covered by PrEP or treatment as prevention, only 15%. But that has increased to 60% of men having condomless sex in 2019. So that's a very big increase. And again, underscores why HIV infections may be falling, despite reduced condom use. So moving on to the second half of the analysis of the at-risk group, negative and untested men not using PrEP who have condomless sex, or the men in red from the previous slides. There's a number of characteristics here that have changed. Some may be more significant than others. First, the age of this group increased very slightly. You can see from 34 years to 35 years mean age. That may not be particularly meaningful. The proportion of the at-risk group who identified as bisexual went up, and the proportion identifying as gay went down slightly, which may reflect the concentration of Australian-born gay men, for example, who have taken up PrEP. Aligning with this, the proportion of the at-risk group who were born overseas increased from 24 to 30%. Actually, the education level in this group went up, which is interesting. It doesn't suggest there's an formal deficit in the level of formal education in this group. Number of partners overall in the at-risk group went down. So the proportion of this group reporting few partners increased, and the proportion reporting a high number of partners went down. Consistent with the rest of the sample, the at-risk group became more likely to report condomless sex both with regular partners and with casual partners. So it's a mixed bag here. There's fewer partners, but there's a greater likelihood of condomless sex. Continuing this analysis, we can see here that there are a range of other strategies reported by this group. This group is fairly likely to report serosorting before condomless sex, so trying to match HIV status before condomless sex. This didn't change over time. There were big increases in the proportions of this group who said they were seeking out positive partners with an undetectable viral load for condomless sex, from 10% to nearly 15%, and a massive increase in the proportion saying they were having condomless sex with partners on PrEP sorting, from 21% to 34%. Testing, or recent testing, increased in this group. PrEP use was stable post-exposure prophylaxis, and the proportion of this group reporting injecting drug use or the use of party drugs for sex both diminished. And so overall, we think that these signs suggest that this group has become less risky, probably because high-risk men have been targeted for PrEP uptake over the last few years. So in summary, in 2019, there was a historic shift observed in these behavioural surveillance data, where we see that PrEP has replaced condoms as the most commonly used prevention strategy by gay and bisexual men with casual partners. Prevention coverage has increased, as has the use of biomedical prevention to make condomless sex with casual partners safe. And the at-risk group, negative and untested men who aren't using PrEP but have condomless sex, appears to be less at risk than before. These conditions, we think, have contributed to falling HIV infections in Australia, and if we can increase coverage still further of the use of effective prevention methods, we think it's possible to achieve the virtual elimination of sexual transmission between gay and bisexual men. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge all the participants who take part in the surveys, particularly HIV-positive men, our AIDS Council partners who make recruitment possible in the field, my colleagues on the periodic survey team, and the health departments who provide the funding to make the project possible. Thank you.